Hello and welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Resting Place podcast with me, Dapo Agiri.
And me, Barney Howe. Today we're joined by someone very special to the podcast.
Near and dear.
Today we're joined by someone very close and very special to the podcast. A definite VRP, a vinyl resting person. I think we're still going with.
We're sticking with it. Yeah, we're running with it for sure.
The acronym.
For sure.
It's the one and only Carlray Edwards. For everyone who doesn't read the little bits at the bottom, Carlray is our editor. He's also an incredibly talented musician, and it's wonderful to have him on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
A long time in the making, I think. A long time in the making, but we're glad to finally have you on and get it sorted.
Yeah.
This is a bit weird for us. We're back in Zoom times. So for those who don't know, we started the podcast in lockdown and it was very much like this, recording over a Zoom chat or a Google Meet chat as the case may be. But we're still sticking to the audio visual. We've still got it. The reason we've jumped across to Zoom is because Carlray is not from our bits. That's all right.
No.
No.
we've gone international.
Yeah, I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I'm pouring some tea. I'm from Detroit, Michigan originally, and I live in Ann Arbor right now, which is like 45 minutes away. And yeah, but I've been fortunate to work with some. Well, I worked at Pirate where you guys recorded. So yeah, so I learned a little bit about the UK from that experience, and it was very fun. And it was very fun to work with people from different parts of the UK, and like everyone who I worked with was a musician, which was really crazy. Like, and they were all really good. Like, and no one wanted to talk about it. And then like you kind of like pull it out of them slowly, and like people you wouldn't even have imagined did music, and it was so good. And it was just a really fun thing to do for a minute. So yeah, it was cool.
So that's great. I'm sure you've got some stories of time at Pirate. Just
yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to remember the one place that was, I can't remember what location, but it was just rough. Like they stole everything from like there.
Oh
and
my
like
God.
that we had to like ban like this entire family of people who like all had the same last name. And it was just like, it was rough.
Carnage.
That one was a rough one, but most of the places it was cool, and most of the people were cool. I was lucky because I didn't have to work on the phone, which a lot of like the people in the UK did, and we just did chat. I was hired with like a person from South America who was actually an engineer, and then a guy from somewhere in the Midwest of the US who was like a psychologist. It was a really funny combination of people who like started, and then eventually they hired on some other people, someone from New York and someone from LA to do the time span. But we were lucky because like at first there was no like telephone stuff, so it was all just people in the chat. And like obviously you run into, it's like working at a supermarket or something. Like you run into every kind of person. You have some great times, you have some like absolutely like people who are just really angry and upset, and you just like kind of learn how to deal with it as best you can. But all in all, it was pretty smooth. Like I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the people I worked with and the whole thing. So it was cool.
Well, I love that. That's amazing. It does seem like a very like working so close to different musicians must have been amazing for you as someone who is a musician themselves. Can you like share with us a bit about like your kind of not only your creative process, but also like what kind of stuff you enjoy creating, like what you would like to emulate, if there's any people in the field that really inspire you?
Oh yeah, those are all good questions.
Thank you. I realized I asked about 10 in one go there. I should have started with one. But I was so excited about my segue, I just kept going.
You nailed it.
I think I can kind of pull that all together. Well, I guess like for me, that's a good question. Okay, so let me try to answer that in some sort of order. So my creative process was was different when I made like the music that we have out, the album Receiver that we made, is mostly stuff that I made, and then it's got some songs that I worked on with one of my other bandmates, and then one of his songs. But for the most part, like most of the songs were written by me and recorded by me, but also one of our old bandmates who was like my best friend from childhood played drums and like programmed a lot of the drums and stuff, or came
Wow.
up with the initial concepts. So yeah, like that was the creative process. And honestly, I won't talk a lot about that because like that actually ties really strongly into this episode, because when I started making the album, what would become the album, it was really right when I found this album that's my Vinyl Resting Place album, and the band itself. But yeah, now it's just different. Like initially we were a 5-piece, 2 people left, and or no, I take that back. We were what, me, Colin, Gabe, and Matt. Yeah, we were 4-piece, 2 people left, and then it was just me and my bandmate Colin, who's the other person who's been in the band the whole time, and I've
Mm.
also known him since high school. And so yeah, like we did our own thing for a while, just like kept playing the songs like off drum machines and stuff, and like played that way. And then another person who was actually my neighbor, he lived like in the basement of my building, but I met
Wow.
him when I lived in Midtown Detroit, which is where Wayne State is, and like the Majestic Theater and the Magic Stick, which are like 2 bigger venues in Detroit. And so he joined the band around the time that I was finishing the record, and we played we started playing shows about like 4 months before COVID, and then that just shut everything down for us. So
Mm.
we kind of didn't do anything for a while, and then in that time I released the album like during COVID, and then we started playing live again. And we basically just, I mean, we just, what we've done pretty much the whole time we've been a band since like 2016 has just been playing the same songs like in a different ways, or as I write a new one it would get introduced in. So anyone who's known us from like that time has seen us play like a lot of the songs that are on the album like 3 or 4 different iterations. And finally we've finished this last one where it was like a lot of like samples and musical interludes in between the songs. Like we spent months just trying to get that part together. And then we went on some small tours. We went to Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. We went to Brooklyn because I have a friend out there, and we did that like 2 or 3 times. And honestly, like Philadelphia is like 10 hours away from Detroit, and
Mm.
Brooklyn's like 12 and a half. So like when you're going there just to play for fun, like it's cool, but like it's not really super sustainable.
No.
So
Mm.
we learned that really quick. We met some really cool people and made some good friends. But we basically were just like, okay, we finished up. I think it's 2024 now. So I think we played our last show in April of 2023. And then we started making a music video for one of our songs from the album, and it's like we spent like 6 months on it. We like put on like black green screen suits, and then we used hot glue guns to melt these like lights into the suits, and then we put the suits on. So like I think probably if you ask for me to play something at the end of the episode, that'll probably be what I'll send, because it's like
Okay.
Nice.
really
Yeah.
it's not so much representative of the music we make anymore, but like visually it's like we spent like 6 months like just like putting all this footage together, and then like doing stuff with it. You'll like, if you watch this and then like watch the video and look back on it, you'll go like, okay, I see why you couldn't explain it, because like this is crazy. It doesn't really make any sense.
I mean, yeah, we absolutely have to have that at the end. That's,
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
people are
I,
going to
I,
need to watch
I
that.
only want to see that. I can't think of anything else.
It's pretty cool. But yeah, so we finished that, and then we just kind of like, we never, as the 3 of us, made music together. So that's kind of what we spent the time since then focusing on. And so we have like 4 songs and one that's older, and like one is like a jam, one is one that I made, one is one my bandmate Colin made, and we're working on another one, or we're going to be working on another one that my other bandmate Devin made. So we're probably going to we're trying to finish them so we can start playing live again, and then we'll probably like go back and retroactively record maybe like an EP or something like that with the 4 or 5 songs. And yeah, it's very different than what we've been doing. It's a lot more reflective of the 3 of us together, because we're trying to do that like band thing where like everyone has to agree on what we're doing, and like it shouldn't just be like, even if it's the person who made the song initially, like they shouldn't just totally dominate, which is kind of tough for me because I've always been the leader. But after those tours, I was just kind of like, I can't make another album by myself. I spent like 6 years making that first record, and it's too long, and it was just really tough. But like, it's just kind of tough too when you're like trying to go like, okay, you made the music mostly, but then like your 2 other people are supposed to play it and somehow feel connected. Like, as you guys know, like a part of what makes great bands great is that like they're all in it and they're all connected. And we started to notice that like we weren't that way. And I think it was partially because, one, we were playing really old music that didn't reflect where we were, but also because we didn't all make it. So like everyone's heart couldn't be in it to the same way. So I'm really thinking that when we finish what we're working on now, like beyond just like musically, it's a lot more potent, but I think it will be like, we'll be a lot more connected in playing it. And I think it'll make for a much better show. So yeah.
Amazing. Love that.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a really good origin story. I like the journey that you've gone on from the growth and then people leaving, coming back, and now you're in kind of the final form, and I can't wait to see what comes.
Thank you.
You were speaking about the essence of a great band. I think that leads on very nicely to talking about your vinyl Rest in Place album, Carlray. Can you let the people at home know what you've chosen and tell us a little bit about why?
Oh yeah. I've chose Oshin by the band DIIV. It came out in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And it is like, I always say that like that is the album that like gave me my listening ears to hear certain frequencies and tones and sounds, because the songs have a lot of layering to them, and they are really complex in that way. And so like over time, more and more comes out, and at first listen sometime it can kind of sound like maybe not so much is going on because it kind of blends together. But when you really take your time with the album, it like really, I mean, the frequencies in there, like because of all the reverb and like some of the tones, like I actually re-listened to it this morning.
We love a guest who does their homework.
Edit.
Yes.
It's rarer than you think.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I know the album like as close as I could know most, but I just wanted to hear it. And because my partner's studying for finals right now, she's in finals week for university.
Wow.
And I listened to it on headphones, and I have some like the headphones I got for editing, which are like flat mid tone. So like it's not like Dre Beats or like those Skull Candy or any of those where like the low end's really heavy. So it kind of does not give you the music in its like natural intended way. So like listening to them in these, there was like, it was very easy to hear everything kind of like on vinyl, where it's like if the vinyl was recorded properly, the instruments should actually sound separate, kind of like they do when you're recording them and mixing them in the audio program. Like people who work on music know that like the quality you get when you listen to it in the program versus when you export it out, like there's always going to be a little bit of loss. And I feel like even with Wave or FLAC, which are like high quality musical formats, like that's like as close as you're going to get. And vinyl's kind of the same way. But what was cool about listening to it today, since I have Apple Music and it was lossless, was that it kind of sounded like it does on vinyl. So I noticed that there are these times where like certain high notes on the guitar get hit, and they go like ding ding. And it's kind of really similar to if you've ever heard an album and like the bass is going along and then it hits a really low note and it's like it makes that
Mm,
vibrational sound.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
um it's kind of like that, but it did the same thing with high notes, and I thought that's really interesting because like you don't hear that a lot either. So like,
Mm,
yeah, like I love that album. Like it it like I said, it gave me those ears to hear. And it's tied to a much longer story about I guess what's like the best way to, is this the right place to say like this is how I found the album and like where like.
Yeah, totally, man. Deep dive into it. Yeah, we love
to it,
it.
and you've alluded to it before. Like I'm quite like on the edge of my seat trying to figure out the backstory.
Yeah. I'll keep it as succinct as I possibly can. But like it's really interwoven into my life in the way that a lot of people's records are with like particular times. And I
Mm,
remember like the creator of the band Cole was in many bands in Brooklyn before DIIV, and Beach Fossils was the other band that he was in leading up to DIIV. And so I remember hearing about Beach Fossils, but I only listened to them a little, and I was really into this band called Real Estate, which was kind of like an indie band coming out around that same time.
mm,
Honestly, maybe 4 years earlier, but that's besides the point. They kept going, and yeah, so I remember reading actually an article that was like, I remember they were always, the one thing that I really didn't like about the way that they talked about the band in the like news, or however you would call that, like Pitchfork and like
media.
Stereo Gum, like
Yeah.
all of those places,
Mm,
like they always were a little bit condescending. And there's different reasons why that we'll probably run into throughout this conversation, but like I remember that it was like a beach fossil side project was what DIIV was
mm,
initially called. And that was
Don't
common
like
at
that.
that time because of the Brooklyn scene, which was like huge. Honestly, like I don't know anything that except for maybe like New York in the 1990s, early 2000s, with like the Yeah Yeah Yeahs and Interpol and the Strokes and bands such as
Mm,
those, where like it was a scene, like
mm,
like Seattle. It was a scene. How the scene got made, did the publications make the scenes, or did the bands? That's a whole nother
mm.
story. But Brooklyn from like 2000 and I don't know, maybe it never stopped after 99 2000, but I would definitely say for me, my experience from like 2010 through 2014, and specifically with the record label Captured Tracks that DIIV was initially on, Beach Fossils was on there. Mac DeMarco, that was the record label he was initially
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah.
mm,
Blouse, and I mean, you could go on and on with all the bands that came from there, but like it was like they had a chokehold on indie music for about
Mm,
3 4 years through the initial phases of the label. And so I remember hearing about that, and I didn't really pay much attention to it. And I was dating someone at the time that it was a very crazy, tumultuous relationship, a lot of experimentation with drugs and things like that. And just like the kind of one of those first relationships I would definitely call like toxic. But
yeah.
also like I learned a lot, and I learned a lot about music. But the point being that at the end of that relationship, I said, I'm going to seriously approach music and making music.
Mm.
I did this thing, the like Kanye West 10 beats a day over the summer type of vibe, where I
nice.
basically I would make one song every day, and I did that for like 6 months. And where
Wow.
I
That's
was,
commitment. You made it through.
yeah,
That's fair play.
That's
Yeah.
unbelievable. Yeah.
it was very hard. And at the end of it, I was a much better musician because I have no
Hmm.
musical training or anything. But yeah, like I did that and then kind of started dating that person. And then I came out on the other side, and like she was musical, and we were like, yeah, let's do a band maybe, or like, but so many other things just took precedent. And I was like, you know what? Like, I'm going to make this a priority. Like, this is what I'm going to
Mm.
do, and I'm going to find the way that I need to do it. And so, yeah, like, I was I think like one of the things, and this will probably come back over and over again, is like the unfortunate mythology that exists in rock and roll specifically, but also in music, that like you have to, in order to make really good music, you have to be high, or like you have to take
Mm.
drugs, or like be in an
Mm.
altered state. And I
Mm.
think that if you're like an evolving person, that may be a part of your life with or without music. But if you're a musician, it's very possible that like that can be a place you can go through and even get stuck. And so for me, that was kind of like the deal that I made, where like after my experience in that relationship with drugs, I felt comfortable enough going like, okay, what if you, instead of just using these things for fun, you try to apply them to a purpose, which in my case was making music. And I happened to find a lot of bands at that time that were like, that was their thing and that was how they did it. And I mean, it's in a lot of bands' histories, regardless of if it was the only thing that they did. But it was just, I was very like, I was probably what, like maybe 24, 25 at that time. So I was
Mm.
very
Mm.
like naive, immature, and susceptible. But at the same time, like I hadn't had any terrible experiences, so like I wasn't put off on it. So
Mm.
yeah, so to come back to the record though, that was the record that I remember doing my experimentations and listening to it. And the thing that's so cool about that time, and like about Cole, the leader of the band, or maybe now I think it's more of a democratic thing, but at the time it was definitely something that he started, was just the way that he approached his communication with the public. So
Mm.
he was like one of the first musicians I ever heard that really talked about what it was like to be a band, like canceling the European tour because you were going to lose money. Why maybe you shouldn't hire a manager because they're going to take your money. Like
Mm.
Wow.
the fact that corporate sponsorship in festivals and things like that can, it's kind of a really interesting juxtaposition, because bands are very, a lot of times, anti-capitalist, blah, and at the same time it's like you got this big like Miller Lite banner like behind you as you're trying to play your song about like how you're against capitalism or something like that. But like, if you got to pay to play sort of thing, where it's like they are
Mm.
intertwined the way that
Mhm.
our society and government and business in most places are intertwined. Like there's no separation for that. So like he was out there like talking about that stuff, and like in a very brash way and unapologetically. And he got a lot of flack for it, because a lot of people were like, why don't you just shut up and like enjoy being a musician? And he was just like, well, wait a minute, like I'm trying to tell you what it's actually like, because there's this
Mm.
myth that like more recently has been a little bit more dispelled. But like people just think like as soon as you get a best new music from Pitchfork, or you're like whatever, like your album gets above a certain score, or you're like in all of these publications, that
Yeah.
means people are sending you
You're
checks in the
clear.
mail. Like
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
it.
Facts.
That's all, you're good. You don't have to make another good record. Like, not to mention just like the sweat that people have to face, like how you follow up your first album when it did really
Mm.
well, which is another story. But yeah, so like he dresses really fucking cool, especially at that time. Like I had never seen anyone with such style. And coming from like an environment, like going to a Catholic all boys school where like you had to wear a certain dress and like that was it. Like
Mhm.
my college times was like a time where I was really able to find my expression of myself,
Mm.
musically, and also like how I chose to dress and express myself.
Mhm.
So I like really like I can't lie, like I was like a super fan like almost immediately. But like it was just that at that time for him, like drugs was kind of intertwined into that story. And so
Mm.
it was one of those things where like it was one of the first times I run into a band where the trajectory that they took was actually one that a normal person could feasibly follow.
Yeah.
And I would learn later, because I've met people and stuff, about what it actually took for him to get there and things like that. And like, he even spoke himself about like how it almost didn't happen for him. And so that's like something that like, it's it was kind of, I kind of thought, okay, like they were doing this thing where like they were playing like 2 or 3 shows a week. Like sometimes they would play 2 shows in the same night, like just some shit you could only really do in Brooklyn in 2012, 11, 13, 14, like when there were still venues that were like before like total, what's that word, like gentrification happened in Brooklyn, with all of the warehouses and that whole thing, like where basically all that stuff got bought and either torn down or turned into like high-end apartments. But there's a really cool documentary actually that Pitchfork put out about that time in Brooklyn, and about all of the DIY venues and how important those venues were to bands like DIIV when they were coming up, because it gave you the opportunity to be able to play voraciously. And so I thought that I was going to be able to copy that template and apply it to Detroit, maybe 4 years later, which is a very different city and a very different time.
Different
Even if you tried
time.
to do that in Brooklyn 4 years later, it wouldn't have worked the same. But that's kind of a different story too. But you can see what I meant by how it's all kind of intertwined. But yeah, that album for me, like, it was really the thing that I based everything I was doing off of. And like Cole was like a very huge role model for me, and like what I was trying to do and how I wanted to approach music and making it, and like the scene and everything like that. Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of sums that part up a bit.
That's beautiful, man. I think that
Yeah.
that is a vinyl resting place story. I think the idea of the entire encapsulation of your life really
Yeah.
is really testament to the power that these albums can have. And I think never having kind of listened to DIIV before, like it was a fairly new a new discovery for me. One of my notes that I made was like, this captures like teenage to young adulthood. That's just what I wrote down. And to hear that relation to not just the music, but the context and the storyline and the journey that the artists themselves went through, and then how that relates to you yourself, not just as a musician or an artist, but as a person, is touching. Like it's really insightful. And it's an avenue that we've not necessarily gone down on the podcast before, like the way in which kind of drugs and substance abuse has always gone sort of hand in hand and side by side with music. And I think it's one of those things that, as an artist, and when you like spend a lot of time with these creatives, it's like, yes, seeing that there is obviously some relation and connection between that state of mind and creative potential, but not getting like bogged down in the mire and getting too lost in that source, for want of a better word. And that's something that I don't think I would have ever necessarily drawn from the album itself, just as a lay listener. But it was really nice to hear that story and understand the kind of context behind it from a deeper level, from that of a super fan. So thank you for that, man. Really appreciate it.
It's always nice, like kind of mirroring what Dapo said at the end there. What makes a great vinyl resting place for me personally, I think I speak for both of us, is when someone comes on and can say like an entire and very personal story, not like, I had a breakup and this was the album that was in the charts at the time.
Yeah.
Like, this literally not only influenced like your style and like that kind of thing, it also influenced, like, the main guy influences the way you dress and decided to like express yourself for a while. It influenced how you decided to go about your own musical career, to like the extent of trying to mirror that, like, almost like venue style in your own home city. Like, it's incredible. It's wonderful to see it have touched you in so many ways, and on top of that, be a really good album as well, you know.
Yeah. It is, yeah, it is actually a cracking album. When it comes to like the type of music that you listen to prior,
Mhm.
um, is this your like classic genre? Is this the indie sort of post punky vibe? Is that what you go for or lean towards in general? Are you quite eclectic? What's how where does it sit in your spectrum of music?
Well, I would say I can talk about now and then. I would say
Mm,
then that was one of the other things that was so incredible for me about it was just that like I had never heard anything that sounded like that before. Like I listened to
mm,
it this morning and I feel the same. Like every once in a while someone's able to make a record whether they're Kanye West or whomever and like it is just so absolutely profound sonically, content wise, experiment wise, like the influences that they put together. And specifically with the Ocean album, I was not really a like I guess a better segue into that would be the like some of the other albums on that on the what I almost chose for my
mm,
vinyl resting place album, for example, Devotion by Beach House or Kid A by Radiohead, which I'm sure we'll get
mm,
into later. Like when I was a kid I listened to like my musical journey really was like me and my dad used to listen to Tony Bennett in the car, this album Perfectly Frank, which is incredible. I love Tony Bennett
Nice.
and he's like a huge influence in a different way. But I mostly like I was born in 1990, so like I grew up watching MTV and like
mm,
that like Christina Aguilera, like Britney Spears, the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, like anyone who was like really like a child into music and that's how you consume music, like those people are a part of your influence, whether you want them to be or not. And I think a part of my pop sensibility, to whatever degree it exists, stems from those times of like bands you wouldn't even want to like be associated with, like sorts of things, like or bands where like maybe you've just outgrown. Like, I mean,
mm.
as an American person from that time, like I listened to Smash Mouth, like I listened to Nickelback, like
Oh yeah.
I watched VH1 and MTV. Like that was just what was on, and like every once in a while, like someone was totally like going against the grain, but like most of the people are on major record labels, are
Mm,
curated, and in some cases created by the industry. Like so,
Mm.
that's a part of like most people's musical DNA if they were born from that time, whether they wanted to be or not. So I think when I really started to, and my dad listened to a lot of jazz, like
mm,
tons of jazz. Like that was a lot of my upbringing. My mom liked Sade and
nice.
Luther Vandross. So like even before like any of the indie stuff, like that was my background. And then in high school, I really was able to find Enter Shikari, for example. Like I was really into the
We all
fall
had
of
our
Troy.
period.
Yeah, exactly. Like I really like math rock and stuff. Like one of my
Mm,
favorite bands was Coheed and Cambria, and like still like some of their albums are absolutely incredible. Like um and you know like just like all of the bands that were coming out, Block Party, like stuff that like it was really cool. Like Block
right.
Party for me was really huge. Like seeing like a black frontman was like in an
Mm,
indie rock band like was a
mm,
really rare
Mm.
thing that you didn't see all the time. So like TV on the radio, another example of seeing like people who look like you making the kind of music that you like I am like grateful that like those people made it to a position where other people could see them, because you know black or white or whatever, like they influenced like a ton of people. But as especially in that realm of indie rock, like it's not always the most representative culturally of
mm,
people of color, whether it's in your own town and scene or whether it's what's being portrayed popularly.
mm,
So
mm.
Mm.
seeing those specific bands, those two were like a really huge, especially Block Party, because it was like one of the first times I heard what I would liken to dive, like something that maybe kind of like New Order or something, where a lot of the guitar single string, it's not a lot of chords, and like
Mm,
most American rock music, especially from the 2000s, is very chord heavy, as like a remnant left over from alt rock in the 90s, and like Pearl Jam and Smashing Pumpkins and blah, like you know you could go on forever. But like so to hear a band like Block Party, that was like really influential for me.
mm,
And then I went off to like some camps and one year in high school, and I came back with Led Zeppelin and The Doors and Jimi Hendrix.
Okay.
Jimi Hendrix, I mean, what can you say? Like, as like an African American musician, to know he existed and like where he sits in the rock
Mm,
pantheon, like you're just like, I belong wherever I end up. Like, I don't just have to make beats or like make rap music or something like that. Like, if he did
mm,
it then,
Mm.
like anyone of any like creed or color can do it at any time. Like, so
mm,
yeah, so for me, like, when I graduated from high school, that was around the time that I found Pitchfork, and I was introduced to all of the bands within the pantheon of music that they covered. So Devotion was one of the first, by Beach House, was like one of the first indie rock albums that I heard that I would call like real indie rock. They're not on MTV.
mm,
Like stuff like that. But then you have people in between, like Tokyo Police Club or something, where they're like, they were on MTV, but like they're pretty indie at the same time. So but yeah, so like that is a huge part of my like journey, was finding Pitchfork, finding Stereo Gum, finding like, and people's little blogs, like really diving into that, because I've always been that kind of person that gets like, when I feel like somewhere I belong, I can go pretty deeply into it. And so I'm
mm,
also just like kind of obsessive sometimes when it comes to things, even though I don't mean to be. And like, I just felt like for the first time, I was like breathing air. So like, I started consuming that stuff in a way and at a rate that's like absolutely incredible. Like, I did not hear Radiohead until I was like 22, which is crazy. Like, for most people, they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "No, like, you don't understand. Like, that just was not like, they weren't really on
in your
MTV when I
sphere.
was watching MTV.
Yeah,
Like, and yeah, it wasn't in my
yeah,
sphere. So like, and the album specifically that I heard, like that, like I would credit with like leading up to when I found Dive, I was finding these very like eclectic and strange, like Kid A, or like albums, like deeper albums, like the people like the Elephant Six, like what Neutral Milk Hotel is from, like this band called the Olivia Tremor
mm,
Control, which was like a sister band. And like they're out there, man. Like, if you listen to Dusk at Cubit's Castle or the Black Foliage, like the Black Foliage, where they were like, they had their fans like send in their dreams and they turn the dreams into songs, like suites of
wow,
music
no
where
way,
like,
That's so
yeah,
cool.
it's sick. And
mental.
like the I think Dusk at Cupid's Castle has like this like 14 song suite called the Green Typewriter, where it's just like some songs, but then it's just sounds for like 15 minutes. Like, it's just stuff like that where I was just like, there's a whole world out here, like this is crazy. And then
Mm,
just like kind of slowly broadening like what rock or music meant to me. Even someone like Burial, for example, where it's like, by the time I was listening to him, he was only making those EPs that are like fucking 30 minutes long, but it's only 3 songs. So like, I would say like Burial like gave me the opportunity to go like, okay, like, how do I listen to a song that's 8 minutes long and like not just totally like give up or get lost in it? And it
check
was like,
out.
exactly,
Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
so like, though, like his music like really gave me that, like Olivia Tremor Control, like all of those things like kind of pushed to the a band called the Blue, or Fiery Furnace's Blueberry Bolt. Like, that album is insane too. Like, it's just like, it pushes you to the periphery of like what functional music can be. And then you go,
Mm,
okay, like, so where do I fit in with this? And so I made some pretty crazy
mm,
sounding stuff for a while. And right around the
mm.
time that I found Dive, like a little bit before that, the person I was dating before that introduced me to some incredible bands, like Jeff Buckley, who is a guy from the 90s who's just incredible.
Yeah,
Like,
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
a lot of
Mm, mm.
Radiohead, a lot of, I would say, and I'm not like not afraid to say that, like, there's some stuff it sounds like they just straight up ripped from Jeff Buckley. Like, if you listen to between like the Bends and or Kid A, like there's stuff in all 3 of those albums where if you listen to that Jeff Buckley album, you would just go like, that sounds familiar. Like, wait a minute. But and even
Like, also,
still,
wait a
there's
second.
like stories like Tom York seeing Jeff Buckley, I think when Radiohead was on tour in Chicago, I think maybe before the Bends or after, I'm not sure, but just him saying like, he learned what it meant to be like a front person and like to sing and to belt it out, and like like just those types of stories where like someone who could become so accomplished, like we are all these like magnetic fields picking up these things as we go, and then choosing how we do or don't express it through our creative pursuits or like through our lives. And like that's like kind of like from that person I dated, like Jeff Buckley, like I heard of Bjork for the first time. Like I was introduced to a lot of electronic music, a lot of J-pop, which was really big in like 2011, 2012 in the
Mm.
States, before K-pop really kicked in, like Kyaru, Pimu, Pimu, and stuff like that, where you just like, whoa, this is like, I don't even know what this is. Like, this is crazy sounding. Like, so that, and then going like, okay, I need to choose a lane, and where is it gonna be? And for me it was
Mm.
like, okay, well, indie rock seems to be a good place. Like I like Arcade Fire, I like stuff like that, like let's do it. And then finding DIIV, and then going like, yeah, but what if there was some beach house in there? But yeah, like what if there was like, oh, some Kid A in there, or some Flaming Lips in there, or whatever. And then like that kind of got me to where I was. So like, yeah, when I heard Oshin, I had never heard anything like that, because it doesn't sound
Mm.
like anything anyone ever made up to that point, in the same way a lot of those other albums don't. Like they're just like
Mm.
very unique, and like as an accomplishment, like it's an incredible accomplishment. I don't know what else to say.
For sure, no, for sure. Barnes, do you want to jump in and we'll?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, like, first of all, there's such a difference when we talk to a musician on the podcast. We have a lot of great guests, like some comedians, some actors, that kind of thing. But to talk to someone who name drops like 100 bands from like top of the charts Radiohead to like, no one's ever talked about the Flaming Lips before. I love the Flaming Lips, and they've just
Mm,
never come
mm.
up. And like, you clearly just know your stuff so well. So to kind of have you established someone who understands not only how music works, but understands how genre works, how time works in the field of music, to have
Mm.
this as your album, I think demonstrates it off the bat to be a very like important thing, something that's like a real, not a mix of everything, but something that kind of everything else could evolve from or evolve to, like it's linked in
Mm.
that way.
Yeah.
And it's so unknown as well. I'm, kind of getting this off my chest. Until I heard you say it, I've been referring to the band as DIIV, and I thought the album was called Oshin.
So a quick really explanation of that. So they were initially called DIVE, and Cole changed the name because there was like a German or Norwegian band also with the same name, and he listened to their
Correct.
music and he liked them, and he was like, okay, I'm gonna change the name because, like out of respect. So he changed it to DIIV. And the album Ocean, the title track, like the lyrics and the name of the album and the way it's spelled, is based off of this poem that he found that like this child wrote. And that's why it's spelled Oshin, because it was like a kid's poem. And that's how they spelled the word ocean. So
Ah,
yeah. So you're not in
that's
the wrong. No.
Thank you.
that's good. That's good knowledge.
Yeah.
I find it so fitting, like, to piggyback off what Barney said there about like time. One thing I found about the music, and again, I'm going to come at this album very sonically because that's going to be my introduction to it. But where it encapsulates that sort of adolescence, as I described earlier, it gives me that sense of the early 2010s, late noughties indie rock bands that were coming up in the UK. But the kind of minimal lyrics and the detraction of, like you say, like not being so chord heavy and single string guitars and the washed out sound of a shoegazy feel, where the British music was really like, the people I'm thinking of are kind of like potentially at the two-door cinema clubs of the time, where it's a little bit more upbeat and it's a little bit more like floaty. Or even if you look at like Foster the People, and the lyrics being a little bit dark, but the sound being quite up tempo and energetic. This is just sort of a like mesmeric, that hypnotic, really really mellow sound that I just haven't heard before.
Mm.
And I think it's one so indicative of that period of time and of that sound of indie rock in that era, whilst being so entirely unique, which is such a difficult thing to do. And I just couldn't stop listening to it. You sent it to me a while back, and I reckon I've listened to the album on repeat like 10, 15 odd times, because once I start, I don't stop, and it just flows in. And I don't know, maybe I want to go back to being where I was at maybe like 18, 19, 20. But it is so, we said it before on the podcast, but it's like a timestamp. And that timestamp gives you a snapshot of what life was like, or where the band was at and where the music for the time was at. But then it doesn't age poorly. It still keeps the crispness, and I would be like super eager to listen to the album on vinyl and hear that kind of sound quality from it. But it gets to that level of timeless where wherever you listen to it, as long as you're in the headspace and the right mood for it, it transports you straight back to where you were or how you felt. And that was me listening to it as a newcomer. And then for your reason to be kind of picking it as your vinyl resting place to align with that, I feel like that's come through so strongly in the whole entirety of the art, the context, the album, the lyrics. It's a great pick. Honestly, a really, really good pick.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, I feel like you touched on a lot of the stuff that I would bring up, which is like having watched the episodes that I've worked on of like, there's like this thing that comes up of like what makes an album great or timeless or what have you. And like there's some personal criteria, but there's also debatable objective criteria you could apply. And I think the thing that you spent most of the time speaking about is one of the more relevant subjects, which is how does it hold up over time? What does it sound like within time? Does it refer you to a specific place? And yet, can it also somehow remain out of time? And a good album can do one of those things. Like a great album can do two, but an incredible or like perfect is maybe not a good word, but like a timeless album would do all three. And I think that Oshin is a very good example of somehow simultaneously reflecting a very specific period, geographical location, but at the same time also sounding like it just kind of exists in like a void of like it just doesn't really make sense, some of the stuff that happens with like the lyrics. I was listening to it today, and like there's so many songs where like there's a secondary voice with a reverb put on it with a trail, and sometimes there's delay, so you get like something going like oh, and then it goes like oh, 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 but then it's like pitched up, so it's like oh, and it's like you're like, well, why would you think to do something like that? But then you also constantly have this concrete mid-tempo range voice that is like the anchor for the song. So it's like there's so many things that Cole did differently. Like there's an artist called Baba Sala from Mali, and he like has a very specific guitar playing style, and so does that region and that part of Africa. And you hear that in that album because from what I understand, Cole at some point took some guitar lessons from a Malian guitar player or someone who knew Malian guitar. And so like a lot of what you're hearing of why it sounds so non-American or European or really anything is that it is shoegaze or dream pop, but put through that lens of like that specific style of guitar. So like also the fact that it very much subverts the typical pop song structure, where there's songs like Air Conditioning where it's like a minute and a half before lyrics comes in. There's songs like Past Lives where there's music in the front, then there's lyrics, and then there's music in the back. A lot of the songs on the album replace the verbal chorus with a musical chorus, which is also not something that you find a lot of the times in music, especially not music that becomes popular. So like when you look at like all of those things and you put them together and then just go like, the thing that's really cool about it too is just that, like, I remember him describing that like the songs are split into like happy, sad, and kraut. And that's like, so there's songs that are more kraut rocky, there's songs like Earth Boy, which are like definitely like on the sadder end, and then there's upper songs like
Mm,
maybe a weight or something like that. And I think it's very rare too, and this would be another for me criterion for what would make like an timeless or, you know, incredible album is it has to, well, I won't say it has to, but it's really nice when you listen to it as a whole and you go, that's the way that it was meant to be heard.
Yeah.
But you can also pick out
mm,
a song like Sometimes, or How Long Have You Known, or Air Conditioning, or Wait, or Human, or any of those songs almost work like a single, just depending on like what genre you want to put it in or what musical space. So like the album is really quite a feat. For many different reasons, but like like those are the ones that just immediately come to mind. And I think that's like one
mm.
of the things, like for me too, is that like maybe not as many people know about them as say like a Tame Impala, for example, but the
Mm.
fans that they have
For
are
sure.
absolutely like diehard, like nearly cult like fans. And I've always
Nice.
thought that like that I would rather have like, you know, 10,000 or 1,000 or 100 fans like that, where like you put something out, they're gonna
Mm,
buy it. You come to their city, they're gonna come see you. You sell some
yeah.
merch, they're gonna buy it. Like if you put out the
Mm,
album 3 different times, like Ocean probably got put out like 4 times or something, like because they had some issues with the art. So there's like the original version with the original art, there's a second version with the second art, there's like a third version that was like a special like on tour version where it's like the second art but with like negative eyes, so like the background's
mm.
black and the art is white. And then there's
Wow.
one that just came out for the 10-year anniversary, with which is like the new, I guess, more permanent art. And I own all of those, like I own all of them. Like, honestly, like, and it's like one of those things where it's like, just give me a reason to give you money. Like it's rare that
Nice.
like you have that kind of relationship with your fans, and then like you fucking meet not only Cole, but like all the guys, like, and all the people who have been in the band, and like they're just incredibly nice, caring people. Like I went through this phase when I had first started the band where like I made kind of like some demo CDs, and like I would go to concerts and I would give the band or the person the CD of the demo, and I draw like their face on it and like put their name on it. And like I think I probably did that like 60 or 70 bands. And I mean like bands, like any band that you can think of that came to Detroit, like I gave them one of those CDs. And like
That's commitment,
it
man.
That's
was,
mad.
it was, but
That's
like
so cool.
that's like a different thing, which like we'll probably touch on at some point later, about like when you start to understand like your motivations for your behavior. And like I was trying to find this movie. It's like a French movie or a German movie. I thought it was called The Fan. I think maybe that's the translation, but like it's basically about this woman who's just a fan of this, like I think he's a musician or like a TV star. And like you should watch the movie because like
Mm,
it really, when I watched it, it made me take a look at myself as like a fan and go like, okay, like
mm,
there's like a level of obsession that like for an adult that like it maybe is not a line that you want to cross. And like when you're
yeah.
starting to like connect to your people who like you idolize, which is a whole nother question of how that comes to be, but like when you start to like relate to those people and approach them in like a really extreme way, where like you can even be like a little like fantastical, or like you really have to be careful. And it's really easy to do when you're young, and it's also really easy to do if they're like an influence of yours in the field that you're in. But
Mm,
yeah, like I think that that's just one of those things where like all of those guys were always so nice. And like they, like
mm,
I know I was like a total like very like an aggressive fan in that way. And like they were always just so kind. So, and like maybe like the vibe that you might get from like their pictures or even from the music might make you think that like they wouldn't be, but they are. Like they're all very very like nice and kind people. And like I've had conversations with most of them and they've all been really nice. And like I've just had really solid experiences with them. And this is like a message out there to all the people who are fans, as like a musician and a super fan of different musicians. Like, I remember the first time I saw DIIV, there was this young woman that was there with her parents, and Bailey, the guitar player, one of the guitar players, was doing the merch table. And I remember the young woman going like, I'm scared to go up there and talk with them, because like I just kind of am. And I remember like that struck me so strongly. And like you can see that a good band goes out of their way to try to make their fans feel welcome, even if they may
For
Mm.
be being
sure.
a little intense or extreme sometimes, because
Mm,
like you can maybe understand that like it's not always the easiest to talk to strangers, or like talk to someone who like
yeah.
you have like a really strong like for, or like you
Hmm.
look at them as you're here and they're up here, and that creates like this division that's one of the biggest issues with the entertainment industry as well, and with like music and
Mm.
movies and everything. Is just that like you think that they're not people, and they are. And like when you
Put them on this pedestal.
Yeah.
exactly. And when you start to put the
Mm,
artist on the pedestal, it's what creates all of these strange like dichotomies. And like I think the thing that's really I mean, I guess like to me, like, and this is like kind of taking it to another place, but like it's very clear to me that at some point humankind took their own inner divinity and projected it outwardly in order to be able to have it reflected back at them. I think that's where religion came from. I think that's where the externalization of God came from. And we do that with entertainers in a smaller way, where we
mm,
basically go like, if I could be as good as Tom York, then I will have made something of myself. And so
mm,
at that point, like your own greatness is now being held from you at a distance, at a point that may be unreachable, because who's going to
mm.
be Tom York? Like, come on,
Yeah.
and for
Mm.
Tom York,
And
like,
you're not Tom
I'm
York.
not. That's the whole point, and no one is. And like Tom
Yeah.
York is only
Yeah.
Tom York. It's like him wanting to be
Mm,
Jim Morrison. Like you can't. You can be Tom York. Look how
yeah.
that turned out. It turned out great.
And that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
like, and I'm gonna
Facts. Yeah.
try to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
my best me. But like that's kind of the thing
Mm,
where like I had that whole thing with Jim Morrison myself, or with the Doors, where like you can just kind of, especially at the age of like 15 to 30, we're basically walking through life and like collecting influences and going, okay, I like that. I want to integrate that into myself. I like that. I want to integrate
mm.
that into myself to some degree. At a certain point in your life, your persona could be mostly 90% made up of a bunch of other different people and not even
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a part of like your maturation as a human being is like finding out who you are and going like, yes, I still have these elements, but like they're not me. Or I take them and I make them
Mm,
into like I include them into myself, and I move forward with myself as my main essence. And that's what a good band does. They take all their
mm,
influences and
Very
they
true.
create something new out of them. So it's no different in that way,
mm.
but it is a really tough paradigm, because like we do put artists and entertainers and politicians now even on a pedestal.
Sports stars.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. It's a thing that's around the world for sure. I think it's one of those phenomena that always existed.
Hmm.
From
Yeah.
like if we go back to like the time of ancient civilizations, whether it be the gladiators or whether it be the chariot races or what, this is the same. This is a continuation and modernization of those core like basic like human structures or social structures that we've created. Sorry to bring it back to something that we've touched on before. I actually know the French film you were talking about.
Really?
Yeah, number one fan.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I did. Right. I used to study French, and when you were discussing it, I was like, "This sounds familiar." Yeah, number one fan.
Thank you for finding that.
Yeah, it's all right. But it's one of those things that I think I definitely myself have had to take a look at in the way that I approach like my fandom and the way that I look at how I support my favorite artists, because they are just people, and like taking that step back has probably made me a little bit less like, for want of a better word, like obsessive. There was definitely a point in my time and in my like recent history where the way that I approached a musical artist is like they are something beyond what I can achieve or beyond what I can get to or beyond my comprehension of what life is, right? And it was a gig that I went to with Barney. We went to see this singer called Sipo, who super talented guy and obsessed with his voice. Like sonically, everything that he does is everything I wish I was. And we were queuing to take a picture or whatever, and I stood there and I was like, I'm not sure I want to do this. Realistically, this is a 23-year-old man who's standing in front of me. Yes, he's a supremely talented 23-year-old man, but I think I might be past the point of needing that like validation of, oh yeah, they've acknowledged me, or they've signed something of mine, or they've given me a little high five, or we've taken a picture. I didn't go necessarily to raise him up. I went to listen to some incredible music. I've done that, and I've got the experience that I've needed from that. And I don't need to necessarily put all of the adoration and the love onto the individual, because he is just a 23-year-old bloke from Birmingham. And it's interesting that you say that. Like, I think that journey of trying to traverse how we interact with our celebrities, for want of a better word, is something that we fall down at as a general society. I think there is too much of a disparity between artist and audience. It's something that I think as I've grown and I've matured, and like you say, between the ages of 15 and 30, I'm slap bang in the middle. I'm not going to say it. Well, I'm slap bang in the middle. Like I've moved away from that idea of kind of idolizing or putting the artist on the pedestal, because I'm not necessarily sure it's healthy. It's the same. There's not a footballer's name on the back of my shirt anymore, because it's like, he is just a bloke from anywhere who's playing for Arsenal. Like, they are still people at the end of the day.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, like, that kind of ties back into the part that I was like touching on before, which is like, I think that you're running into that early, in my opinion, because like for me, especially as a musician, and then you start meeting all of these musicians, it can stretch out a lot longer. And honestly, I think that what you're describing is just a sign of maturity as an individual. And like, that's life. Like, you go through your phases and you grow out of them. And like, I'll be different 10 years from now, I'm sure. And I was different than who I am now 10 years ago. But like, I think one of the things for me that kind of started to disturb me was when I took more of an introspective look at what is it that I'm trying to get from these people by trying to forge this type of relationship. Because I was like the kind of like, I would bring them like gifts and shit, like like a yo-yo with your name on it, or like just some shit that like I was just like I probably got Cole like most of Baba Salah's albums. I just would burn it and give it to him one time. Like, and like, you start to think, for me as an individual, I'm like a very giving and caring person, but like, I've heard some really funny sayings that like empathy or like an empath is not that far away from a narcissist. And that's a really interesting thing to think about, because we as individuals do not ever have one single like motivation in our behavior, psychologically speaking. So I started to really think about like, what am I doing here giving all of these artists the demo? Like, what am I doing here giving an artist a gift? What am I doing here when I'm coming up to get a photograph, or I'm coming up to get my album signed? And I think there's a difference between wanting to have your vinyl signed, wanting to have a photograph, wanting to have a t-shirt signed, and kind of some of the things that I was doing, because you really look at it and you go like, it's like, I want them to like me, or like, I want to be friends with them. And maybe if I like give them something, or like, if I can get into their space, like, they will let me in. And I think that just kind of comes back to just the idea of like, what it's like for the individual in many cases, whether it's because of your gender or orientation, or how you choose to express yourself, or the color of your skin, that is really easy to feel like an outsider. And I think especially in that specific domain, like, you just want people to like you. You just want people to want to play with you. You like want a band that like you love to ask you on tour, like in this sort of like, like really
Mm.
fantastical dreamlike way. And like I think when I really started to take a look at myself and started to try to derive my motivations for my behavior, it became really clear to me that they weren't like entirely altruistic. I wasn't, a part of me was doing these things for fun. A part of these things were being done so that I could just show some support. Because sometimes what makes an artist's day when they're on a shitty part of a tour is the fan coming up telling them the words they say, wanting to get that
Mm.
photo or wanting to get that picture. And then, like, that could, like, boost you up for your whole day. But at the same time, like, there are lines that you can cross. And I think I was at that point where I was crossing the line with my relationship with artists and like what I thought that maybe I deserved from them or what I hoped to get from
Mm.
Yeah.
them or by being
Mm.
connected and
Mm.
related to them. And that's just something that like, it took me a long time to realize that. And so I approach music and both the people who are in my immediate sphere as my like comrades musically, on my
Mm.
level, and also people who are on bigger levels. Like, it's just, I just approach that differently now because I understand being on both ends of the stick that like, you know I think that you just think about like what your motivations are, and then you go like,
Mm.
you should, the one thing I will say is you should always just go from your heart. Like if you feel like going up to them and getting a picture, then do it. Like if you feel like
Yeah.
getting your stuff signed, do it. Because at that point you just have to understand it's not really about them, it's about you. And like as long as you don't
Mm.
misinterpret what you're doing, like everything's an exchange. So maybe it'll be a nice thing for them, maybe it won't be, but like if that's how you feel and like what your gut or like your soul's telling you to do, then do it. But at the same
Mm.
time, I've had so many t-shirts and albums and stuff signed. And the thing that's kind of sad about it is that like I sit here with you today and I go, well, what did it really mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like I can't take those.
Mm.
I can only hold on to those moments so long before it can become a hindrance, because
Mm.
experiences are beautiful and they are in a lot of ways more valuable than possessions. But at the same time, like you can only use them to a certain degree. Like you can't take them everywhere with you. I can't remember every show I went to all the time and every person who ever signed something for me and every handshake and hug that I got.
Yeah.
But I think the individual moment, whether it be 100 times or like once in the next 15 years, where you look back and you do get that spark of memory of like, or you find the shirt sign that you haven't seen in years. I think in my head that all kind of makes it a
Yeah.
little bit worth it. And then that's that, like, even if it's not going to be a constant source of joy or that constant source of nostalgia, the one or two times where it flickers back into your memory and you're like, oh wow, I did just have the best time. Or sitting here with us and being like, oh, actually DIIV are, they're great people. I remember meeting them and they're lovely. I think that element just it makes any negatives it pale into insignificance really for me. Like, or pale in, like, it's so, it's one of my favorite things in the world when I just sit and remember some of the best musical moments I've had. Or we were doing the episode of favorite gigs, and
Hmm.
like the whole day I was just riding off the little buzz because I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, I have had some really incredible times, and it's been such a pleasure to kind of run through them in my mind and go back over them again. It's just unbeatable. It's unmatched as an experience. And I think you found the line that that you need to draw in the sand.
Yeah.
But everything everything up until that point is still so worth it.
I agree.
One thing that I definitely wanted to probe into, because I'm intrigued from your point of view, Carlray, and also from your point of view, Barney, like probably coming from the same layman's knowledge as me. But I wanted to touch on our favourite songs on the album
Mm.
and see what we landed on whether there was a consensus. We had our first consensus in 3 years, which was incredible. Not too
Yeah,
long
we
ago.
did. Of course.
Yeah.
But obviously, as the guest, Carlray, like, what is your favorite? And it's probably like choosing between children. But what is your favorite song on the album?
So I had this one picked a long time ago, and I'll just say it because it's the one that I always fall back on. But the caveat I will place on this is that the thing that's really cool about this album for me is that you could, I wouldn't say favorite song, but you could say what's the best song, and it will all depend on what criterion you choose to judge it by. So
Mm.
if you were looking for a single, you could say like How Long Have You Known? It's got a catchy melody, it's got a nice beat, it's got some, it's still kind of got some definement of the pop structure, but like it's just kind of an earworm as far as they go. But if you want to get locked in, you could say Air Conditioning, because like that song just locks into a groove and then it sticks with it and it takes it out throughout. If you're looking for something a little more esoteric, you could say Earth Boy. If you're looking for something a little bit more like rocky, I would say Doused or Wait. And if you just want something that just has a very strong emotion, I would say the final song, Home, because it's just a really beautiful track. With all that being said, I would say my favorite song is Past Lives, because
Okay.
it is, to me, Past Lives kind of sums the album up. Like, when you, for the first time, when I actually heard the lyrics, it was kind of mind blowing because it kind of just sets you up for the whole album, where it's just like you're gonna be getting into some non-traditional territory as far as like subject matter. So like when you hear the lines like, I was your home, but you locked yourself outside and ran with your ghosts back to a place you've already known, nowhere to go but to your past lives, and hide from it all. A buried flower convinced you'll grow. Like, when you dissect that, like, you're talking about a lot of stuff going on there for like a listener who's like maybe not locked into that, those types of phrases, and like all of the concepts that are just brought up with such a simple sentence. Like, it's kind of mind blowing. And like the lyrics, like when I heard them, I was just like, you got me right there. And like the way that
Mm.
like the echo on the voice goes, and like when he goes like outside, and like how it stretches, and like you combine what's being said with the way that it's being said and the effects on it, and the whole album really, it locks you in that like this is going to be like maybe an otherworldly experience. And what was really interesting, and I had never noticed it until today, and I've been listening to this album since 2013, but those lines are the first lines that you hear on the album. And then the final song is called Home. And he says, you'll never have a home until you go home. And you just kind of loop it, kind of like that Pink Floyd Wall episode where it kind of
Yeah.
loops back
Yeah.
on itself. It may not be so direct, but like it literally like wraps the album up and like puts a bow on it, because like it's right there where it's just like, it's almost like an excursion from like, you leaving yourself and realizing that the only thing that there is to do is come back to yourself, regardless of all of the experiences and hero's journey and trials and tribulations. Like, you kind of just, like The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, like you just got to go home at the end of the day. And like, you know what I mean? Like, that's when the
Yeah.
story kind of comes to its completion. So I would say that song for me, and that's the reason why.
I like that.
Love
That's really
that. Yeah.
beautiful. I mean, like, so unsurprising that you've come in with like a really intellectual and intelligent answer to the to the question. Like, we have people recite lyrics, but you have like a whole chorus there, a whole verse of that song like ready to go off your mind. I couldn't do that for anything. I really liked Past Lives. I think it's a real banger. You kind of touched on a few of the other ones, like you said, different reasons for different songs, different reasons for seasons. You did mention my personal pick. You listed it as one of the more rocky ones, and that is Wait. I really enjoyed
fucking
Wait.
knew it.
Yeah, Dapo always knows the one I'm going to go for.
I knew it.
He
Yeah,
always
I
knows.
knew it. Yeah, that's we should start guessing. That's what we should do. I should start guessing before, because right now I could just be lying. But
I think no, well, I mean, Dapo knows it very well, and to be honest, this album is very well in general. It was hard for me to pick. We talked about a lot of things this sounds like, and a few of the names that have come up over this chat: Two Door Cinema Club, Foster the People, like they are my Vinyl Resting Place album. That kind of indie period is so important to me. Radiohead as well are a huge part of my musical experience. And I think Wait was like, it was almost like listening to a combination of those bands like through a looking glass, like under some water or something.
Yeah.
It was, I just read it under the ocean, if you will. It was, any of these could have been my answer. I have listened to this album 4 or 5 times, not as many as Dapo, I'll hold my hands up in a bit, but I really enjoyed this. We'll be listening to it again for sure, but I think Wait was my favourite. Dapo, where do you come down on it?
You also mentioned my favourite song, Carlray, as you were kind of going through the different reasons, and probably to steal your kind of vernacular, for want of a better word, to lock into a groove is exactly what I want from most songs and most musical experiences. Whatever that groove may be, and that will depend and change on my mood and where I am. But Air Conditioning, like, as a piece of music, blew me away.
Yeah,
like it's haunting in a way.
Yeah,
like even when I googled to see what the lyrics were the first time, and I was like, right, so the only words that the only words that are said in this song: choke clean, cold to cool my thoughts away, and that's it.
Yeah.
and I was like, right, wow. To layer on top of that, it's one of those songs. One of my Vinyl Resting Place cliches is I love music that kind of you can fall back into, or that envelops you. And the lead in from Past Lives into Air Conditioning is a period of time in the album where you sort of forget what's going on around you, and like you rightly said, you locked in. I think it's a song that I've played on repeat a lot, because it fits all my different moods. If I'm feeling angsty, if I'm feeling a little bit lighthearted, if I'm feeling a little bit airy and just kind of wandering aimlessly around the world, it fits the different spaces in my mind. Weirdly enough, I also find it quite like therapeutic as a song to listen to. I get to the end of it, and there is always a bit of a sentiment of feeling a little bit at ease. I think that is something that's very difficult to evoke in just an instrumental piece of music, but it's so well constructed, and it fits so well in the album as well. It flows so well from Past Lives and then through into the next song that you wouldn't be kind of blamed for just forgetting that it was there. It feels like it's very much a passage to keep you listening. But it's just the song that I go back to in the album, and I don't think I could have picked anything else. Like Barney said, though, it is a top tier album, and then the quality, even for me, who's not necessarily from like a rock background in terms of my music, a lot of what you were mentioning earlier, Carlray, in terms of growing up on jazz, and then my parents had a lot of Motown and that sort of vibe, as well as the MTV like rap, hip hop. That was just my introduction into music. That was what was in front of me at the time. We have our indie rock phases, and we have our heavier rock phases, and I'm a bit more of an open-minded listener now than I've ever been. But it was just such a striking, like, visceral experience that I had with Air Conditioning, which it just doesn't happen a lot when you listen to music. And I feel like between us, we listen to a lot of new music now, and we love to explore what is out there, and across genres. There hasn't really been anything that just like made me sit up and take notice, and I think that's such a powerful thing to be able to convey.
Yeah, and I think that you touched on a really interesting point too, Dapo, and one of the things that makes the album so powerful is that it's real hard to write the line between instrumental and vocal. And it's very rare
Mm.
that an album is able to do that. I think it's able to do that because of the way it reconfigures song structure from like popular American or European style. And so it makes it that you can have a song that is instrumental but still have vocals at some point and it's not weird. Or it makes it so that like you can have vocals and then they stop and then it's music for a while. And there's a lot of different types of music that employ those types of techniques, but you don't really always find it in indie rock or in more popular music, especially at that time. And so I think that like that's one thing I would say. And then two, like the kraut songs like that I would consider like doused and air conditioning, like krautrock is a very unique genre because it's basically like trance, like electronic
Mm.
trance music, where it's like there's a few different types of musics that are in different genres that like they can lock you into a mode and then they can do things with it. Like one of my favorite artists in the electronic field that does that is called The Field, and their music is
Yeah.
like you swear you're listening to the same thing over and over again. But then like 2 minutes in, you're just like, wait, but something's different. And then like 5 minutes and you're like, wait, like something is very different. And then like I've listened to some of those, like his albums, like, 12, 15 times. And I'm just like, you can never like pinpoint exactly when something changes. Like there's so many moving parts and like
Mm.
sometimes it's just an effect gets added onto something. But like I love that music because it's like it does
Yeah.
like it makes you feel a certain kind of way. And I think air conditioning really embodies what like really good krautrock can do, like bands like Noi or Can or others where like you just like you get locked into that groove and like 10 minutes could go by. Like air conditioning could be 10 minutes long and like it wouldn't matter, like because
I
Yeah.
wouldn't mind.
once
I'd be sat there listening to it.
exactly
Lovely time.
when the bass and the drums come in, like anything that happens after that is just whatever, and then it just
Yeah.
eventually ends and you're like, oh wow, like I could listen to that a whole nother time, like. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think it really like it really did a good job at embodying like that element. And I think all of the songs do a great job at embodying like the mood or technical aspect that they're supposed to be incorporating. And just the music in general is so tight, like there's not any dead space, and like there's very like for the rhythm section of like the drums and the bass, it's like a very short intervals of time in between when notes turn over. So it really locks you into the tempo and the pace. And then the fact that honestly, like all of the songs have like the same thing going on. Like the drums sound pretty much exactly the same. Like the bass, like all of the effects on the bass are pretty much exactly the same. It's only the guitar that like maybe sometimes it's chorus, maybe sometimes it's reverb, maybe sometimes it's a little bit of delay or a
Mm.
combination of all of those. But like it's a uniform album, and it's one of the reasons it sounds so good from front to back. But it's also one of the reasons too that like it like all of the songs are so deeply connected and interrelated, in my opinion too, because like that was what when we were making the album, what I was really into was like, okay, I'm not going to buy any new instrument pedals for like the duration of while I'm making this album. So for 6 years all I used was like a line 6 DL4, and like that was basically it. Like that's like most of the record is just the line 6 DL4 on a very specific setting that like is normally used to loop, but we just use that instead. So like that's kind of like the thing. And like because of that, even though all the songs are different and like everything like that, you get this uniformity that like
Mm.
the only way you really can get it is if you use a similar technique and a similar like equipment over the course of like the project. Otherwise it's going to sound different.
Amazing.
So
Yeah.
I feel like we're all definitely in agreement that this is objectively a good album. I don't think we need to have that segment, but I am very interested to discuss if Carl, you give us a little brief overview of some of the other albums you thought might have made the cut for your vinyl resting place. Yeah, like a highlights reel of the ones that could have been.
Yeah, and I'll keep these explanations more succinct. But yeah, I can go through. So I know that I sent Beach House Devotion. That
Mm.
album is also really important for me, as I mentioned earlier, because it was like the first real indie record I listened to out of college, or going
Mm.
into college. And like just the way that it sounds, like it's so dreamy, and so like Victoria
Yeah.
That's
Legrand's like
beautiful.
vocals, like Beach House is just like, they're one of my favorite bands. Like they're like one of the best bands of our time, because like somehow they make an album like every couple of years and they've never fallen off. Like they found a way to take this very, very specific sound and just go like, okay, on this album we're going to take it here, on this album we're going to take it there, on this album we're going to take it there. But they never go like, okay, we're going to go over here and do something different. Like it's always Beach
Yeah.
House. And like that, like songs like Devotion, and or not Devotion, like Astronaut, and like Holy Dance is definitely my favorite from there. But like those are just
Mm.
songs where like you just go into their world and you're in there. And like
Mm.
that's what I would say about that. I think another one was Kid A by Radiohead. The same thing. It's just
Oh,
like
Yeah.
yeah.
very, very unique, very like once in a lifetime type of thing. When I heard it, it totally
Mm.
changed my perception of music, how you can sequence an album, like hearing
Mm.
all the stuff that, at least at the time, what was being said about them being sick of using guitars, and like how they approach, like Tom York was listening to Aphex Twins and like Autechre and like all of those bands, where you're just like, you listen to them and you're like, okay, like I get where this came from. Like it's a
Yeah.
direct byproduct of the influences, and
Yeah.
like of coming off of an album like OK Computer, where like, I mean, it's like Animal Collective with Merriweather Post Pavilion. Like what are you supposed to do with that sound after that? Like what are you supposed to do with guitars after you make OK Computer? Like nothing, I guess. Like you make Kid A, like you make all of the things that they made after, where like the
Mm.
electronic element just never really left them after that point, even if it
Mm.
was just
Yeah.
the way things sounded. And so like, yeah, Kid A for me, like a totally pivotal in that way. I think another one that was on there was Girls album. That's a band that I
Yeah.
found out about a little bit after DIIV, and they were kind of also a part of that. Like the narrative around them was that they were just a big druggy band. And so like that's like kind of, it hit me at that, at that time when I was like I was talking about earlier, with when I was making the record. That was basically all I was really listening to, were bands like that and the Velvet Underground. But like the thing that's really unique about Girls, regardless of how the music was made, was that it kind of sounds like like if you listen to like contemporary rock as a child, which I didn't, but this is something that I could relate to later, is that it kind of sounds like every band your parents ever listened to, but like you can't quite understand why sometimes. Like a lot of their songs, you're just like, oh, this sounds familiar. Oh, that sounds familiar. And like that's what it is. Like it just sounds like they literally took the modern American songbook from like 1960 going forward, and they
Mm.
somehow were able to chop it up into little pieces, make like a stew with it, so that there's no way to separate them from those, like that type of music. So they do
Mm.
cool stuff with effects, and you can call some of their stuff even shoegazy, or like really heavily affected, but like at their core, like
Mm.
Christopher Owens songwriting and the sweetness and sensitivity that comes off in his voice, combined with Chet Junior White's production, is just like dream team. Like you're never going to get anything like that again, because like the two of them together, and at that time another great album representative of a different place, San Francisco, in the late 2000s, early 2010s, is
Mm.
that album. So yeah, I love
Mm.
that one. And then the other two, Jack Johnson, In Between Dreams, which is totally different than any of these other albums. Like
Yeah. It really
Very
was. Yeah.
not being the least left field.
it's one of my favorite albums. It's beautiful. The lyrics, first of all, I would say Jack Johnson is an incredible lyricist. And when you listen
Mm.
to that album, sometimes like it's actually kind of similar to Ocean for me, where like the lyrics in that album are really otherworldly, and they're really like sometimes metaphysical, like very like cool, but like almost everyone's heard like Sit and Wait and Wishing, and like that's the song I heard. I saw it on VH1 when I was like 12 or whatever. Like, but I revisited the album maybe in around 2014, and it just blew me away. Like, it immediately I was like, this is one of the best albums. Like, this is one of my favorite albums. Like, the sequencing, like the songs, the songwriting, like his style, like that, just that sparse, I would call it like, and this is not a derogative term, but Starbucks music, because there was a specific time in America where like if you went to Starbucks, like it was like Norah Jones, Jack Johnson, Feist, like people who are in no way, shape, or form should be pinned down into such a thing. But that's like what would be playing there, maybe, and where you could buy it like there. So, but that album is so much more than that, and it's just like it's just a beautiful piece. And then I think the last one is Yeezus, because that's my favorite Kanye West album, and
that's crazy. This is so
hilariously enough, like my partner and I had to go see my nephew. He was in a play of the Odyssey, and he played Poseidon. He killed it. Oh man! But we listened to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy on the way, and that's the only Kanye.
The best Kanye album, should be said.
I will not disagree with you. I think it's the best one. That's why I think he's kind of like Radiohead, where you could go like debate. Sure, like OK Computer, the Bends, I feel like for most people would say that's their best album, but it's a question of what's your favorite. And I think that's kind of, you're a great artist when that's where you fall. Like the episode you guys did on Kendrick, like it's not about if it's good or whatever. Like you can, you know what I mean? Like it's just about like which one is your favorite. And so like, for me, like we listened to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and I was like, yeah, like this is perfect. Like the whole idea of what he did with like flying everyone to Hawaii, he spent like $3 million to make the record, like, and just like interviews with Rick Ross, where he's like, yeah, I wrote my verse for like Devil in the Dress song, and Kanye was like, this is good, but I think you can do better. And then like I did, and like that was like his approach with that album. He was just like basically going to people they were like getting up and like drinking smoothies and like exercising and then going to the studio for like 8 hours. It's like it was the beginning of what we knew of Kanye as like the curator, where he had only done it in bits and pieces in other albums. He was able to go, I'm gonna take this person because I know exactly what they're capable of, and I know exactly where they belong, and I'm going to put them right there. And then I'm going to make them give me the best version of what they can do. And that's what's going to be on this record. And then on top of that, I'm going to push myself to also deliver the best version of myself that I can be. And it was really interesting because I forgot how dirty that album is. Like it was when his lyrics really started to cross that line of like, am I just being obscene on purpose, or like where am I going here? But it's like it's the perfect meeting point where the obscenity of the lines is perfectly juxtaposed with, this is what it's like to be an inner city child growing up in Chicago. This is the troubles of the world. The fact that it ends with like lost in the world and who will survive in America. Like who's going to put Gil Scott for like 2 minutes at the end of an album, and like the stuff going on with the music, like no one would have done something like that. And so he hit the balance and he hit the peak. And for me, Yeezus is like, okay, if this is like the top of the mountain, and then like Yeezus is like over here and like down a little bit, because it's the exact same thing that he did with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, but with new contemporary artists. So like Arca and Gustaffelstein and like people like that, where he was just like, okay, like you just make this bit here, like I'm gonna go sample Daft Punk's synthesizer for 30 minutes and I'm gonna cut that bit up and just put it at the beginning. And like I really do love like describing Kanye West through Radiohead, and I just say that Yeezus is his Kid A, in the way that My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is his OK Computer. So the reason that Yeezus is my favorite is because My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy was really the point where he was trying to venture outside of his realm, and he was just starting to get a little bit of static for it and like a little bit of pushback. And Yeezus is like he went outside of his realm and he just got so much pushback. You can't be an architect. You can only design shoes. You can't like make your own clothes, and if you do, like it's got to be some urban attire. Like, yet this guy is going and studying with Italian shoemaker with Virgil Abloh for however long. He's going and studying architecture. Like, look at the way he designed his fucking house. Like, there's like no like edges or some shit. Like, it's crazy. But I think the point is the reason that like I like Yeezus so much is because it takes like the anger from slavery times in America all the way up through the 21st century anger that you could have as a black man. And then also one that like someone who's proven themselves as being like a quote unquote genius of being able to create incredible things. But because of maybe his race, like you look back at history, there's tons of people who were scientists and doctors, and maybe they drove a race car or maybe they made beer, like, and it's totally cool. But like when Kanye West does it, like he got a lot of feedback. And so Yeezus is like him channeling that, like, I'm going to take everything that I've been given over this time and I'm just going to shoot it like right back at through the prism of the African-American male in the 21st century, like consumerist world. And I'm gonna make a rap album that no one's ever made because it's not a rap album. Like it doesn't sound like anything anyone's ever made in any genre of music, even in the electronic field. But the fact that some of the stuff that he does in that album is just absolutely incredible. So yeah, like I think that I love that album so much because it really embodies that frustration that he must have been feeling, and that like you can possibly relate to if you've ever wanted to do something and someone just kind of told you couldn't, even though maybe like you should have been able to do it. And so yeah, that's why I love Yeezus, and that's why that one could have easily been the pick, just like Kid A could have easily been the pick, or Devotion, or Jack Johnson. It just kind of depends on my mood.
No, for sure. That's unreal. This episode has been like one of my favorite music podcasts. I don't know if either of you have listened to Dissect, but that's how I felt. It's a really, really great podcast. Guy who breaks down albums. We're not going to give him that much airtime, but the knowledge and the breakdown that you get in the Carlray is, it really honestly has been so fun. Like, it's been fascinating as kind of host to be able to like pass the mantle on to someone who really knows what they're talking about.
Speak to a master.
Someone who has the passion and the care is lovely. I really hope you enjoy editing this episode as much as we've enjoyed being a part of it, and we've enjoyed having you on. Thank you so much for giving the time and coming to join us, Carlray. And to those listening at home and those watching on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Vinyl Resting Place, an episode where I think you've learned something, which is not always something that we can say on this podcast. So we will catch you very soon next week for another episode.
Thank you. Bye.